Thank you, everybody, for coming out on this glorious Sunday evening. It is Sunday. Oh, probably Friday evening. I'm sorry. I've been locked away in a. I've been locked. It feels like Sunday, does it not? I don't know. Is it just me? Yes, I agree. I concur. Thank you for coming. Tonight is a book launch of sorts for this book that I co-published with Eva with our publishing imprint Ecstatic Peace Library. We've been in London for the last 5 to 7 years, and we used to publish books in New York City when we were living there the last decade or so. And we've just gotten a bit sort of busy this year, and one of the books that we published was Musics, which I will try to hold up here without straining my tricep. This is what it looks like. I think you've seen it on the merchandise table over there. This book is something we're really, really proud to have published. The genesis of this book was when Steve Beresford, who was playing with his improvising ensemble, which John might have been part of at St. Mary's Cathedral in Stoke Newington last year at some point, and Eva was walking back to our flat and had heard some incredible music coming out of this church, and went inside. Lo and behold, was Mr. Beresford and this improvising ensemble. And I was in New York visiting my family, my mother, and she called me and said the most incredible thing happened. I was walking home and I heard this beautiful sound coming out of the church. I walked in and there was Steve Beresford and a host of musicians playing this incredible, beautiful improvised music. And then we went to the pub afterwards and had a couple of glasses of wine, and he started telling me about a fanzine that him and David Toop and many others were involved with in the early 70s into the late 70s, called Musics. So she's telling me all about this, and it sounded completely intriguing because I've always been incredibly engaged with an interest in archiving and free improvised music, particularly coming out of the European landscape, and even more so England. And so I knew nothing about this fanzine, which I was sort of done communally and sold hand to mouth, and I say sold because I think a lot of the copies were just given to anybody who had any interest or anybody who was involved with any of the activity of the scene at that time. And I believe the one place that you could really find this was probably at the Compendium bookstore in Camden, which was a wonderful place that I remember going to in the 80s, which is sadly no longer around. And the fanzine, I call it a fanzine. It was a magazine. It was a Xeroxed, stapled zine that was that the musicians themselves printed and compiled and stapled and did all the handiwork for and distributed. And not many copies probably left the British Isle, although some did go to the USA and some did go to the rest of Europe, but very few. And the magazine concerned itself with music that wasn't being discussed in any other music journalism for the most part, which is primarily free and improvised music and art, but looking towards all cultures around the world of music that was on the margins, or music that was folk musics that weren't readily heard, especially in this time period, on any real documentation. And so we were fascinated by this, and we first saw the issues that we saw from Steve Beresford's collection, which was the only extant collection that we knew of a full run. The magazine was published from 1975 to 1979. There's 23 issues, and as we paraded through all these issues that were very sort of text-centric with a fair share amount of graphic work, of scores and some photographs, etc. But it was mostly dialogue and debate and discussion about music that wasn't being discussed otherwise in most music journals. And it was fascinating, and a lot of it was very personal. There was a lot of the excitement in the magazine was the responses that were happening in the letters section, where people were sort of, there was acts of positioning and acts of just sort of argument and consideration. And so we decided to make a facsimile compendium where we cleaned up a lot of the magazine, because some of it was slightly difficult, challenging to read, maybe because of just the printing services that were being used.
I still have my copy of issue number 1, and
yes,
it's barely legible.
It's barely legible.
It was printed on a cassette, the first one, one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wore out basically.
So we did it, and this is the tome. We printed it at Aldgate, which is a printing company that was in Aldgate at one point. It was the original anarchist printing service in the 60s and 70s. They're now in Bow, and we've used them for a couple of projects, and we really wanted to use them for this, and we did. And it's just been published. It's rather expensive because it was very expensive to make, but we've tried to price it at a point where we break even with it. It's a bit of a library tome, and we printed 500 copies, and so that's about it. And we've done a couple of different events. We did something at Rep Trade East where we talked about this book, and I joined Steve Beresford and David Toop, who were instrumental in making this happen. First we contacted Beresford because he turned us on to it, and then it led us to David Toop, who we were certainly enamored by and sat down with, and they gave us their blessing to do this. It's a funny thing because so many people were involved with this, and it was a very sort of communal activity, and it had less to do with any singular proprietary kind of concern as much as it dealt with anybody who was involved with this, is co-ownership of it, if ownership is even the term I should use.
I think at the time, I have to say, I think there was a particular kind of political stance, that there wasn't any one boss and people working for the boss and stuff like that. We didn't really have there was a kind of constitution. People did pay some money on the editorial board, as it were, to sort of put some money in to start it up. But basically the first issue, I remember going round and round Martin and Mandy Davidson's kitchen table like this, picking up sheets of paper and handing them to Derek Bailey at the end with a big stapler, who just went like that, and nobody actually designated the jobs. I think Derek got himself the best job, actually, because he was sitting down all afternoon. But it was very much that sort of feeling of the times, sort of 70s, where we wanted, it was important to produce something ourselves, but it was also non-hierarchical structures and things, which could be sometimes great and sometimes a pain in the arse. I mean, for the first time at the London Musicians Collective, for a while, they had premises which they shared with the Filmmakers Co-op in Camden Town, and there was a move to run it by open meetings once a month. And so somebody would bring in a bit of carpet because they thought it would make the sound better. and it stank. So at the meeting, somebody would say, I think we should vote on throwing out the carpet. So everybody voted to throw out the carpet. The next month, there'd be a meeting. It'd be a completely different group of people, and somebody would bring in another piece of stinking carpet. You know, so it's not always an ideal way of getting things done, but it was very much part of the time to do that, I think. And I feel that's kind of important, and it comes through in the diversity of stuff in musics. You know, everybody was trying stuff out and vying for position. You know, and there was a lot of kind of, oh, I don't really like that, or that's a bit precious, and all of these things were going on. But nobody else was doing it for us, you know, and that's what you have to do. It's like Incas Records with Derek Evan and originally Tony Oxley. You know, nobody was doing it. You know, nobody's going to put your stuff out, so you put it out yourself. And when you were doing gigs in those days, it was kind of letraset, which you rubbed onto a sheet of A4, found the cheapest photocopy in your newsagents, get 10 copies done, give it to your friends, and you'd have 2 people in a room over a pub, but at least you were trying to get the stuff out, you know. So it very much reflects that kind of thing, that it's a homegrown thing, you know. And we tried to do our best in a way. We tried to have sort of amusing stuff, political stuff, debates about things about how does your geographical location affect your musicality. All of these things were in it, you know, and also there was a page on the back for listings for gigs, which is what I did actually. I was the listings geezer. Probably the safest position actually, so duck all the flack going around, you know.
So you know, it's an amazing read. As to be expected, I think there's a lot of writers in the pages of Musics who are a bit surprised to hear about this magazine being compiled again. We've all gotten on in a few years. We're a little long in the tooth since 1972, and I think maybe, I mean, we were most of the people involved with this were young and kind of wild, and I think there's a few people who probably feel like, I don't really feel that comfortable with some of the things that I might have written, or some things I might have said being published once again, this time with, you know, in a bit more of an officious kind of tone. But there's not much we can do about that, and
Exactly.
You know, so we really did sort of consider the fact that the information in this book and just the ideas and the dialogue are, you know, they're really interesting and really important, especially in this kind of community here at Cafe Auto, where you know, the programming is so incredible, and it comes out of, in a way, a lot of the template that Musics had, you know, or a magazine like Wire, you know, in a way. It's just like, this is kind of a real genesis text for the most part. But did you, John, what I'm curious about is, like, when you and everybody were editing and writing and publishing Musics, did you have any future vision about it? Like, you know, in 40 years' time, this is going to be just completely arcane, obscure information? Or is it going to be something where there's this really sort of above ground kind of interest, such as a venue like Cafe Auto or a magazine like The Wire?
No, I mean, I was kind of probably the youngest one in the group in a way. I mean, I came to London when I was 17. Played my first musicians co-op concert at Ronnie Scott's at the age of 17, and I don't know. I mean, I challenged the thing that we were all wild then, because I'm still wild now. Thank you very much. I'm not going to slow down. And but I don't know what I thought at the time. It was just something you you kind of did, you know. I mean, Janice Christensen, who was sadly missed out of Ben Watson's book on Derek Bailey, I have to say, who was Derek's partner, put on a concert at the Wigmore Hall for 11 young improvisers, one of which was Terry Day, who was 33 at the time, so he wasn't quite so young. And I can remember going out onto Oxford Street with some of these A4 photocopied sheets, giving them to people, a bit like Hare Krishna, you know, like, hey, there's a gig at the Wigmore Hall, you know. And I suppose it was just to do with that. I don't think I was thinking too far, but I was, as I say, I was the youngest in the group, so I don't know if I was thinking too far in that way. I just think it was something we felt we had to do, or I felt we had to do this stuff because nobody else was doing it.
What brought you into this world of music, free improvised music in London? As a 17-year-old, you said?
Yeah. Well, I come from Romney Marsh. I was brought up by my paternal grandparents. I never knew my mother. When my aunt and uncle could move into the house next door to my grandmother, my grandfather had died when I was 13, I knew I could kind of get out because we didn't have a flush lavatory. We just had an earth closet, and my great-grandmother was still alive until I was 13. She was 96, and my grandfather died a few months after her. So it was just me and my grandmother, the local grammar school. So I was listening to all this, you know, it was a great time for playing the guitar, 1966, when I started, and onwards, you know, and then there was kind of the blues boom, and then the prog rock, and then I started listening to out there stuff, if I can put it like that, you know, so I was kind of checking out stuff that wasn't necessarily blues-based, you know. Sonny Sharrock was very important. Derek Bailey, of course, was very important. And I went to a gig at Ronnie Scott's, which was the London Jazz Composers Orchestra, Barry Guy's group. And I met Derek Bailey there. I had conventional guitar lessons from Derek. There was a guy in the audience who'd been at my school in the first year in Ashford in Kent. He was having drum lessons from John Stevens. I saw Evan Parker play a wonderful solo, which, you know, I'd heard stuff on record in this checking this stuff because it's out there, man, and I want to check this stuff out, you know. But hearing Evan play live was a visceral experience, you know. It was beyond the intellectual. It was engaging, you know. And Robin introduced me to John Stevens, who said, "Come and play at the Little Theatre Club," which is what he did to everybody, you know. And I played with a drummer called Dave Solomon, who very good soul drummer and was totally crazy in those days. I once did a gig with him where we played for about 30 seconds. I had an orange 100-watt stack here, and Les Paul. Played for about 30 seconds, incredibly loud. Dave just picked his drum kit up and threw it across the room, and then lay on his back and said, "What's it all for? Why am I doing it? What's it all for?" And that was the gig, you know. and then a bit later on, I worked with Gary Todd and Roy Ashbury, and we played with a group called Reindeer Work, Dirk Larson and Tom Puckey. And they were a performance art group who do things like pour red paint in each other's ears and scream at each other while we're playing, you know. So on the one hand, there was the free stuff at the Little Theatre Club with John Stevens. Everybody should listen. Listening is important, you know. And then there was also this art stuff at the art meeting place where a lot of music was actually printed on this enormous, great printing machine, which some of the artists didn't like having in their gallery. So there was that kind of side as well, and those two things kind of met with a bit of the rock stuff as well, having come from, I suppose, John and Trevor and Evan and people were coming more out of